What if I told you that going no contact is not the power move you think it is? That silent treatment you're giving him, it's not breaking him, it's making him forget you. But what if there was a better way? A way that makes him obsessed with you, unable to get you out of his head. Today I'm going to show you the secret strategy that flips the script. One that makes him chase you and regret ever losing you. People tend to believe that control over a situation comes from removing themselves entirely. They think that by disappearing, they will create a void so unbearable that the other person will be forced to fill it with longing, regret, and ultimately a desire to chase them. But this belief is based on a fundamental misunderstanding of human nature. It assumes that absence automatically breeds attachment, that cutting someone off will make them desperate to have you back. In reality, absence is a double-edged sword. It does not guarantee longing, it guarantees space. And in that space, people do not always sit in agony reflecting on their mistakes. More often than not, they adapt, they get used to the silence, they move forward, and eventually they stop noticing the void you left behind. Power in a relationship, whether romantic, social, or professional, does not come from reactionary moves like cutting someone off in the hopes that they will suffer. True power comes from influence. Influence is not about removing yourself from the equation. It's about changing the equation itself. It's about ensuring that whether you are physically present or not, your presence is still felt. If you truly want to make someone feel your absence, you do not do it by disappearing. You do it by ensuring that every interaction you had with them was so significant, so deeply embedded in their psyche that they cannot move forward without being confronted by the echoes of who you are. This is where people fail. They think that by ignoring someone, by refusing to answer texts, by blocking them out, they are taking control. But ignoring someone is not the same as making an impact. Ignoring is passive. Influence is active. Influence lingers. It does not fade when you walk away. It stays, shaping their perceptions, twisting their expectations, forcing them to contend with what they have lost. And influence is not built through detachment, it is built through meaning. If you truly want to affect someone, you must create such meaningful experiences that they struggle to move forward without referencing you in some way. This is why emotional intelligence is key. People are not moved by absence alone, they are moved by significance. If you vanish from someone's life but leave no emotional footprint, your absence is nothing more than a minor inconvenience. But if you leave behind something truly irreplaceable, a way of thinking, a sense of comfort, a unique kind of support, then your absence is felt. It is noticed. And more importantly, it is missed. Many people act impulsively in relationships. They react to rejection, betrayal, or emotional distance by cutting off communication, hoping that their absence will serve as punishment. But punishment is not what makes people reflect. Reflection is what makes people reflect. And the way to encourage reflection is not through absence alone, but through a careful balance of presence and restraint. Show that you are there, but not desperate. Show that you have grown, but not detached entirely. Show that you are valuable, not vengeful. When you understand this, you begin to grasp the importance of perceived loss rather than simply creating distance. Loss is not just about physical separation. It is about perceived value. If someone believes that they lost something truly significant, they will struggle to accept that loss. But if they believe they lost something replaceable, they will move on without hesitation. This is why influence is crucial, because it ensures that what you brought to the table cannot be easily substituted. So the real question is not, should I go no contact? The real question is, how do I ensure that I am irreplaceable? And the answer to that is growth. If you remain the same, if you operate from a place of bitterness and spite, you are not evolving, you are merely reacting. And reactions are predictable. Predictability is not powerful. What is powerful is transformation. When someone expects you to fall apart and you do the opposite, when they expect you to seek validation and instead you cultivate independence, that is when the psychological shift occurs. That is when they begin to question themselves rather than dismiss you. Most people will not admit it, but what truly unsettles them after a breakup or a rejection is not silence. It is the realization that the person they left behind is no longer accessible in the way they once were. That person is no longer waiting for them, no longer emotionally tethered to their every action, no longer predictable in their suffering. And this is precisely what creates impact. The best way to make someone realize your value is not through absence, but through undeniable, unmistakable growth. When you choose to develop yourself, to work on your mind, your body, your emotional intelligence, when you cultivate skills, pursue your ambitions, and elevate yourself in ways that were once unimaginable, that is when the perception of loss becomes unbearable for the other person, because now they are not just dealing with distance, they are dealing with regret. They are dealing with the knowledge that what they once had access to is now out of reach, not because they were ignored, but because they no longer measure up. This is how power works. Power is not in cutting someone off and hoping they come back. Power is in becoming someone they wish they had never lost. People operate within frameworks of perception. They don't see the world as it is. They see it as it is to them, based on their needs, desires, and internal narratives. When you make yourself constantly available, when you are always there, waiting, reacting, you stop being perceived as valuable. You become an expected part of their reality, a fixture, something that requires no effort to obtain or maintain. And what requires no effort is seldom appreciated. Human beings are wired to value what they fear losing. They chase what feels scarce. Scarcity is one of the fundamental principles of human motivation. It dictates economic systems, social hierarchies, even our deepest desires. When something becomes less accessible, its perceived value increases. This is why luxury brands deliberately limit availability. It's why people long for experiences they can no longer have. And it's why relationships, too, are governed by this same psychological law. If you are always within reach, you stop being desired. But the answer is not to simply vanish. Disappearing entirely does not create longing, it creates space. And space can be filled with anything. It can be filled with pain, but it can just as easily be filled with distraction, new experiences, or even indifference. What you want is not just to be absent, you want to be missed. You want to leave a void that cannot be easily replaced, and the way to do that is not through silence, but through strategic distance. Most people make the mistake of assuming that ignoring someone will make them crave attention, but what people actually crave is contrast. They are drawn to inconsistency, to unpredictability, to the feeling of uncertainty that makes them question their level of control. If you were always there, always responding, always accessible, then suddenly vanishing is not an act of power, it is an act of surrender. It is giving up your influence and hoping they notice. But people do not always notice what is gone, they notice what is changing. A sudden absence can be shocking, but a gradual shift, one that makes them question what is happening, creates a much deeper psychological effect. When someone expects you to reach out, to react, to be emotionally available in the ways you always were, and instead they are met with unpredictability, that is when the gears in their mind begin to turn. That is when they wonder if they still have access to you in the same way. And uncertainty, when it involves something once guaranteed, breeds discomfort. Discomfort breeds focus, and focus, whether voluntary or not, keeps you in their mind. This is why the rule of scarcity is so powerful. It is not about punishing the other person. It is about altering the perceived value of your presence. When they assume you will always be there, they do not have to think about you. When they assume they have control, they do not have to evaluate what you meant to them. But when your presence shifts, when you stop engaging as you once did, when your energy is redirected elsewhere, when you become unpredictable in your availability, that is when the psychological shift occurs. That is when you move from being a background presence to a source of curiosity, concern, even obsession. And here is where most people fail. They try to fake this. They deliberately withhold responses. They play games. They manipulate timelines in an attempt to appear less available. But pretense is transparent. People can feel when they are being played with. They might react momentarily, but it does not create the deep psychological shift you need. Because for scarcity to work, it has to be real. Your absence has to be caused by something genuine, growth, self-improvement, new pursuits, not by a fabricated attempt to elicit a reaction. When you are truly occupied with something greater, when your focus is no longer centered on proving your worth to them, they sense it. And that is what makes them feel your absence, not just because you are gone, but because they are no longer the center of your world. This is the paradox of influence. The moment someone feels they no longer control the way you feel about them, they begin to question their own position. They wonder if they were ever as important as they believed. And in that questioning, a sense of loss begins to form. Not just the loss of a person, but the loss of certainty, the loss of a reality where they were undeniably valued. And that, more than anything, is what compels them to chase. Human beings do not remember events in isolation. They remember feelings. They remember the emotions that were attached to an experience, the way a particular moment made them feel about themselves, about their world, about their own significance. This is why two people can recall the same event in completely different ways, because memory is not a record of facts. It is a record of emotional impact. And if you understand this, you understand one of the most powerful forces in human relationships: emotional anchoring. When someone thinks of you, they do not recall you as a list of traits or characteristics. They recall the feeling of being around you. They remember the emotions that were most deeply connected to your presence. And this is where most people fail in their attempts to regain power in a relationship. They focus on absence, on punishment, on strategies of withdrawal, when in reality, the most effective way to make someone feel your loss is not to simply vanish, but to ensure that thoughts of you are emotionally charged. People do not long for a person. They long for how that person made them feel. This is why you can have a list of perfect qualities, be attractive, intelligent, accomplished, and still be forgotten. Because if your presence was associated with stress, with conflict, with emotional exhaustion, then that is what lingers in the other person's mind. But if your presence was associated with deep joy, with challenge, with excitement, with meaning, then even in your absence, that emotional imprint remains. So the real question is not, how do I make someone miss me? The real question is, how do I ensure that the strongest emotions they felt were attached to me? Because that is what they will struggle to replace. People seek out emotional consistency. If they felt a certain way around you, particularly if those emotions were powerful, they will subconsciously seek to replicate that experience. This is why we replay past relationships in our minds, why we compare new people to old ones, why certain moments stay with us for years while others fade into irrelevance. It is not the person we struggle to move on from. It is the emotional reality they created for us. Most people make the mistake of thinking that emotional impact comes from grand gestures, from words, from dramatic moments of connection or conflict, but in reality, it is the smallest moments that anchor the deepest emotions. It is the way someone made you feel effortlessly, without trying, in a way that felt natural and unforced. A glance at the right moment, a laugh that couldn't be contained, a touch that meant something more than words ever could. These are the things that embed themselves into memory. These are the things that shape the way a person perceives loss. And if you truly want to make someone feel your absence, not just notice it, but feel it in a way that unsettles them, it is not enough to withdraw. You must ensure that when they look back, what they remember is not just your presence, but the depth of what that presence meant. This is why emotional intelligence is the most valuable tool in relationships. If you understand how to create moments of emotional significance, you do not need to beg for someone's attention. You do not need to manipulate, to punish, to play games, because you will already be in their mind, in their subconscious, woven into the fabric of their experience in a way that cannot be easily undone. When someone feels lighter around you, when they feel more alive, when they associate you with moments of self-discovery, of emotional depth, of meaning, that is what makes you unforgettable. Not because you demanded to be remembered, but because your presence was an experience in itself. And the irony is, people only realize this after they have lost it. They may walk away thinking they can replace you, that they can find someone new, that time will dull the impact you had on them, but then they meet someone else, and that person does not make them feel seen in the same way. They do not feel as challenged, as deeply understood, as emotionally engaged. And suddenly, they realize that what they had was not just a person, but an experience they can no longer access. This is the essence of emotional anchoring. It is not about controlling someone. It is about being the one they measure everything else against. And when you achieve that, your absence does not just create space. It creates a void that cannot be filled. People are drawn to growth. They may not consciously recognize it, but they are wired to respect, admire, and even crave those who are evolving. The reason is simple. Growth is an indication of competence, of strength, of the ability to adapt to an unpredictable world. And nothing is more psychologically disruptive than realizing that someone you once had access to is now operating on a higher level, one you may no longer qualify for. This is where most people fail after a breakup, rejection, or betrayal. They fixate on what was lost. They spiral into self-doubt, questioning their worth, wondering what they could have done differently to prevent the relationship from slipping through their fingers. And in doing so, they stagnate. They sink into self-pity. They wait, hoping that time alone will bring the other person back, as if the universe will somehow recognize the injustice and correct it. But this is a weak strategy because it relies on external forces rather than internal transformation. The truth is brutal but undeniable. People do not miss what they left behind. They miss what they can no longer have. And if you remain the same, if you do nothing but dwell on the past, you make it easy for them to move on. You confirm their decision. You prove that walking away was not a mistake, but a rational choice. Because why would anyone regret leaving something that remained exactly as it was when they left it? The only way to turn the psychological tables is through undeniable, visible, and relentless self-improvement. Not as a way to impress them, not as a tactic to lure them back, but because you refuse to be defined by loss. Because the most powerful thing you can do in the face of rejection is not to beg, not to explain, not to wait. It is to become someone they never expected. When a person sees that you have elevated yourself mentally, physically, emotionally, it disrupts their perception. It forces them to reconsider what they believed about you. They might have walked away assuming you would crumble, that you would remain stagnant, that you would always be accessible. But when they see you rising, when they see you becoming more, they are forced to ask themselves a difficult question. Did I underestimate this person? And nothing haunts the human mind like the realization that one has underestimated the value of something they discarded. This is why leveling up is not just a cliche. It is a psychological strategy, one that plays directly into the way people evaluate their past choices. When they see you thriving in ways they never expected, when they see you stepping into a version of yourself that commands respect, admiration, and even desire from others, they are forced to confront the reality that their departure did not weaken you, it freed you. Most people live in patterns. They repeat the same habits, the same routines, the same emotional cycles. And because of this, they assume that everyone else does the same. But when you break the pattern, when you grow at a rate that defies expectation, it creates cognitive dissonance. They struggle to reconcile who you were with who you have become. And in that struggle, they feel something they did not anticipate: regret. Not just regret for losing you, but regret for failing to see your potential when they had the chance. Regret for assuming that you were static, predictable, ordinary. Regret for believing that you would always be waiting.